Welcome to KU Padasala. My name is Chad A. Haag. I am an author and former teacher from the United States of America. I'm very excited today to discuss with you the topic of German for reading knowledge. In this fourth lesson, we will move on to the accusative case, but before we talk about that, we'll have to pause for a moment and learn some more vocabulary, because now that we have mastered the present tense and past tense conjugation of the most important verb within the language, which is sein or to be, and now that we have mastered the gender forms for the definite article in the nominative case, we can move on to beginning to use the language much more practically, learning a lot more sentences than we have thus far. Now, as we go through the vocabulary on the next two slides, I want you to keep a notebook where you actually write these down. You need to commit them to memory by committing them to paper first. There's an old trick that one of my professors noted in undergrad, that it's not enough just to show up to class and listen to what the professor says, nor is it even enough to take notes while the professor is speaking. She noted that the trick to studying for the final exam is to keep a second notebook in which after the lecture you go home and you copy by hand one more time all of the things you learned in class. I think this is particularly relevant for learning a language because there's simply so much vocabulary in a language like German that the only way to really interiorize it is to use it, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now. Now, as I go through these vocabulary words, I'd like you to pronounce with me, and I'd like you also to write them down. If you need to pause the tape to do so, go ahead. So we'll now begin with the first word, aber, which is but. Once again, aber is but. Alt is old. Alt is old. Der Anfang is the beginning. Now, in English, we would just say beginning, but in German, we really have to have that the word attached, and that is because the grammatical gender of the noun will be so important in knowing how to properly use it. As you'll see, the total 4 cases within German, it makes a huge difference which one of the genders it is, so you have to learn from the start what the gender of each noun is, rather than learn the word in isolation, then just try to track down its gender later on. So all of the nouns we cover in this course will follow this same convention. Der Anfang is the beginning. Auch is also. Now, CH would be pronounced in English as something like ch. You talk about Chinese food as being something you like. Well, in German, the CH sound, especially if it's occurring at the end of the word like this, is pronounced more like auch. Okay, so auch is also. Berühmt is famous. Berühmt is famous. Deutsch is German. And this is perhaps the solution to the riddle of why exactly it is that the Amish within states like, say, Pennsylvania within the US are called the Pennsylvania Dutch, even though they're German-speaking people. Well, the solution to that is, as the story goes, when they were asked where they were from, they said they were Deutsch. And the Americans thought they were Dutch, because our word for German is German. But the Germans don't call themselves that. They call their language Deutsch, and they call their nation Deutschland. But once again, we have to learn, because that is a noun, the article along with it. This is der Deutschland, which is masculine. So once again, Deutsch is German, and der Deutschland is Germany. Dort is there. Dort is there. Ein is a or one. Ein is a or one. Die Erde is the earth. Die Erde is the earth. Die Frau is the woman. Die Frau is the woman. Die Freundin is the friend, but with that in suffix and with the die determiner, we know that this is a female friend. So once again, die Freundin is a female friend. Die Geschichte is history. Now, in other contexts, die Geschichte von such and such is the story of such and such. But in this particular context, we're thinking of die Geschichte as history. Gut, we already know, is good. Gut, once again, is good. Hier is here. Hier is here. Very similar to the English. Die Frage is the question. Die Frage is the question. Der Freund is the friend, but we know that this is masculine because it's der rather than die, and we don't have that in suffix. So der Freund is a male friend. Die Geographie is geography. Die Geographie is geography. Gross is great or large. Now, if you've ever wondered what the gross domestic product is, or why we talk about a movie grossing so much money on its opening weekend, the word gross, even though it's unfortunately come to be a word for something that's disgusting within American English, it really ultimately originally is talking about something that's great or large, as it still does mean within the German language. Der Herr is Mr. or gentleman. Der Herr is Mr. or gentleman. Ja is yes. Ja is yes. Das Jahr is the year. Das Jahr is the year. Kein is no or not any. Kein is no or not any. Die Kunst is art. Die Kunst is art. Der Land, pronounced with a T sound at the end, by the way, rather than the land, as in American English, it's der Land is country. Die Mutter is mother. Die Mutter is mother. Natürlich is naturally. That lich suffix is kind of like the li suffix to make something into an adverb in the English language. Natürlich is naturally. Nicht is not. Nicht is not. Sagen, very similar to the English word to say. Sagen is to say. Schön is lovely. Schön is lovely. Sehr is very. Once again, sehr is very. Sein, we already know, is the infinitive to be. Sein is to be. Die Stadt is the city. Once again, die Stadt is the city. Studieren, predictably, is to study. And you'll notice, as we'll dwell on much greater detail later on, the verbs that end with ichen are always very similar to the English word. Studieren, to study. Der Tag, the day. Der Tag, the day. Und, very similar to and. Und, and, very similar. Die Universität, the university. Die Universität, the university. Der Vater, the father. Der Vater, the father. Die Wissenschaft, science. Die Wissenschaft, science. Remember, Wissen is the word for the knowledge, which is not that of acquaintance. Not the sense of knowing the shopkeeper down the road, rather than knowing facts scientifically. That's why we see it appearing within this word. Science is that kind of knowledge. Once again, German is much more logical in its formation of compound words. So if die Wissenschaft is science, the one who does science is a sciencer, or der Wissenschaftler. Der Wissenschaftler is the scientist, but also the scholar. Das Wort is the word. Das Wort is the word. Ziemlich is fairly or rather. Once again, ziemlich is fairly or rather. Now that we have all this vocabulary, we can begin using it in some sentences in which, even if some of the words you see in these sentences were not included among the vocabulary list we just went through explicitly, much of it I think you can deduce either from hearing it spoken out loud or through seeing it on the page or from context. Now we'll go ahead and examine the first example as particularly relevant in that regard, particularly easy to deduce just from looking at the form of the words. Die Erde hat 7 Kontinente. Afrika, Asien, Australien, Europa, Nordamerika, Südamerika und die Antarktis. Wie viele Studenten studieren Geografie? So we know die Erde is the Earth. 7 sounds like a number which we can deduce that's talking about 7 Kontinente, of which we have Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, South America. I'm guessing that the thing which the Earth has 7 of is 7 continent. That's why it is die Erde hat 7 Kontinente. And there's a question, wie viele Studenten studieren Geografie? We know wie viele is the question, the interrogative word. How many? Studenten is students in the plural. This is not Studentin with an IN, by the way, which is the feminine suffix. This is a plural suffix, Studenten, like children, brethren, oxen. And the question is, how many of them are studying geography? Wie viele Studenten studieren Geografie? The second sentence, Deutschland liegt in Europa. Es hat 9 Nachbarländer. Die Hauptstadt ist Berlin. So Deutschland is Germany, and we can tell that it's doing something in Europe, because the preposition, even in German, is spelled in. Well, it seems to me that the thing which Germany does inside of Europe is it exists in Europe. It lies in Europe, as I guess what this is. Deutschland liegt in Europa. And Deutschland has something. Es hat 9. 9 is a number which sounds very familiar. That's 9, 9, very similar. It has 9 Nachbarländer. And we learned in the vocabulary that Land is a country, so there are 9 of some sort of country with regard to Germany within Europe. Now, a Nachbar is actually a word very similar to an archaic term within English, which lies very close to home in the literal sense that what lies very close to your home are the people you live next door to, who are called your neighbors. Now, you might be surprised to know that neighbor is a very old word in English because the boor reference there is actually a very old word for something like a peasant. If you say to the present day that you had a real boor over for dinner last week, you're talking about an uncultured, uncivilized person. Well, civilization is talking about somebody in the French sense of being from ville, or the city. That's the French word for city, is civilization. Remember what we said in the first lesson about the more sophisticated word being of French origin, civilization, talking about la ville, the French city. So a boor is somebody who's from the countryside who's actually a farmer. And that's exactly what Nachbar referred to, really in the Germanic sense of the term, the peasant or the boor or farmer. This is really coming from the German word bauen, to build, the Bauer, who dwells near to you. So if Germany has 9 Nachbarländer, these are 9 neighboring countries. So what else do we learn about Germany? Die Hauptstadt ist Berlin. So Stadt is city, Berlin is a certain kind of city. I'm guessing it's a very important city within Germany, kind of a head city, right? Kind of the prime or the capital city, right? So the next city in Germany we'll learn about here is München, which is pronounced in English as Munich. But here we learn München ist eine schöne alte Stadt im Süden von Deutschland. So this is a certain kind of city because Stadt is city. And we have a few different adjectives attributed to this city. We see that it's alte. Well, we know when you introduce yourself with your age, we use alt to say how many years old you are. So Munich is a very old city, but in addition, it's a beautiful city. Schöne is one of the vocabulary words we learn for beauty. And it's located, directionally speaking, within German in the south. Süden. Süden, south, very close in form to one another. But now we learn about another German-speaking country, which is not Deutschland. This is Österreich. Ist auch ein sehr schönes Land. Wie heißt die Hauptstadt von Österreich? Sie heißt Wien. So we learn now that Austria is also a very beautiful country. Sehr is very. Österreich ist auch ein sehr schönes Land. We know that this is following after Germany because we see auch, which means also. Here's a question though, wie heißt die Hauptstadt von Österreich? This is not asking the question, what is the prime city, the capital of Austria? No, it's asking about its name, because we see a form of heißen here. And the response is, sie heißt Wien, which is Vienna. It's named Vienna. Now we have the question, wann waren Sie in Wien? When were you in Vienna? And this is the formal you. And the answer is, ich war diesen Sommer in Wien. I was this Sommer in Wien. Es ist eine fantastische Stadt. It is a fantastic city. Meine Mutter und ich waren sehr oft in der Oper. My mother and I were very often in the opera, apparently when we were there. The next sentence, ich studiere Kunstgeschichte und Architektur. Oskar Kokoschka war ein berühmter österreichischer Künstler. Otto Wagner war ein großer Wiener Architekt. I study art history, so Kunst is art, Geschichte is history, so we have a compound word, art history, Kunstgeschichte, und Architektur, and architecture. Kokoschka was a famous Austrian artist. Wagner was a great Viennese architect. So now that we have studied a few sentences as examples, we can move on now to learning another case within the German language. Now, you may remember a few lessons back when I introduced the notion of case, I used the example within modern American English of the difference between I and me. We have a sense that the two are not interchangeable because I and me may refer to the same literal person, who is this guy, at least when I use the term. But the situations in which I and me are to be used differ because they're literally different cases. The I is used when the person speaking is the subject of the action of the verb, which we know in German is called the nominative case. But me is the word that is used when the person speaking is the object of some action. For example, if I'm playing dodgeball with the high school kids in America, if I hit somebody with the ball, I'm the one who threw the ball. If they hit me with the ball, I am not the one who threw it. In fact, I am the one who am receiving the action of the throwing, which was done by somebody else. Well, this is a good place maybe to begin understanding what the accusative case is, although we shall find out a little later that just referring to object within German is not nearly clear enough because there's different kinds of objects. For the moment, we'll talk about the direct object of an action. Now, case is something which we make use of in English only in very particular cases, like, say, the personal pronouns. We do have different forms for I and me, just as we have different forms for she and her, and he and him, and they and them. But for other words like, say, ordinary nouns, we really don't make such a distinction. And this opens up a window within the English language, a window of opportunity for certain ambiguities to arise, like the following. If I talk to you about a man eating chicken, I could mean two very different things, which can be illustrated by the images you see on the screen. The first man eating chicken I might be talking about is a food vlogger like, say, Food Ranger. He's the Canadian who traveled in this episode to Mexico to have delicious street food like the grilled chicken you see on the screen. That is indeed a man eating chicken. But I could also be talking about a terrifying 15-foot tall bird, which is chasing after some poor fellow because it has an appetite for human meat. That is also a man-eating chicken. So if I just leave it in the form man-eating chicken, it's ambiguous which one of those two I'm talking about. The only way in English to clarify which one is intended is to rearrange the word order to clarify which is the object and which is the subject of the action of eating, and this would be resolved not through changing the morphological form of either the noun man or chicken, but rather through situating it properly within the syntactic structure of the sentence by placing it before or after the verb ate. If it's before the verb, then it is the subject. If it's after, then it is the object. We clarify this concretely by seeing that the first sentence it would be properly written as the man ate the chicken. The second one is the chicken ate the man. But what if there was a way to clarify who's doing the eating and who's being eaten, not by relying on word order, but rather through adding, let's just say, an ending to the noun itself to clarify, such that no matter where it appeared within the sentence, it would still be the subject or the object without any ambiguity. Well, this is what you find in the classical languages of the West, such as ancient Greek, Latin, etc. This example from the Latin language clarifies this not only with regard to the direct object of the flower, but even with regard to the indirect object of the girl, although we will learn about indirect objects only a little bit later on within German. But consider how in the Latin language, puer is already the case form to tell you it's in the nominative, that is the boy, and puellae, with I as an ending, already tells you it's the indirect object to the girl. Rosam, with an M at the end, already tells you the rose is the direct object, and dat is the verb for giving. This is kind of like in English you talk about giving a donation, or even data are quite literally just givens. They're things given to the five senses when you're observing in science. So we have these four items which can be arranged in different orders with the same meaning. We could say, in Latin, puer puellae rosam dat, with the boy at the beginning for emphasis, but we could put the girl at the beginning to emphasize her. Puellae rosam puer dat. Or we could put the rose at the beginning to emphasize it. Rosam dat puer puellae. This is a certain flexibility which having a case system allows, which to a certain extent you also see put on display within German. Well, now we're finally able to move on to discussing the accusative case, not within Latin, but rather within German. And we find that rather than change the ending of the noun itself, which is really more of the way that you would handle this in Greek or Latin, in German it's more like you change the form of the word for the. Now we recall from the second lesson that the nominative case forms were der masculine, die feminine, das neuter, and die plural. We now see that the accusative masculine singular is den, rather than der. The R has changed to an N. Now, the feminine neuter and plural forms look the same. They're die, das, and die, but they are different cases, even if they look the same on the surface level. You'll have to pay particularly close attention to dealing with them. But for the moment, because it's clear in the masculine, we'll use that as our example. If we talk about somebody hitting the ball, let's just say a batter in a baseball game in America, we could say, because ball is masculine within German, we could say, sie schlagen den Ball. They hit the ball, but we could also say, den Ball schlagen sie. Okay, here we've moved the ball to the front, but it's still the object. We're doing that for emphasis, but because it's den rather than der, we know that the ball cannot be the subject of that verb because it's in the accusative case clearly rather than the nominative. So we'll go ahead and play a little game now in which there will be a nominative and accusative case noun in each of the following sentences dealing with the example of a student learning about the fall of the Berlin Wall in school. As we go through these sentences, I'd like you to determine which of these is in the nominative case and which is in the accusative. Once again, word order does not determine this. Be careful for those cases in which the accusative case is coming before the verb and the nominative case example is coming after. We'll go ahead and go through these examples. You can underline perhaps on a piece of paper which one is nominative and which is accusative, and we'll compare answers on the next as we move on to the next slide. So the first example is Der Student studiert die Geschichte von Berlin. The second, das Buch beschreibt den Mauerfall. Here, some new vocabulary is beschreibt is describes, very similar to English, and Mauerfall is a combination of the words Fall and Mauer refers to the wall. The third sentence is der Autor findet die Situation sehr komplex. Den Mauerfall versteht der Student, aber die Situation versteht er nicht. The fifth sentence, der Student fragt den Lehrer. The sixth sentence, der Lehrer erklärt, which is a new word meaning explains or clarifies. We see clair in the middle, he makes clear, die Situation, die Mauer und den Mauerfall. So pause the tape, write down these sentences, determine which is nominative, which is accusative. Once again, word order is not enough to tell you that, and we'll compare answers on the next slide. Alright, so here we have a color system in which the nominative case items are in red and the accusative items are in blue. So the first sentence, der Student studiert die Geschichte von Berlin. We find that because the verb is studies, it must be the student who's studying history rather than history studying the student. So here clearly, der Student is red and die Geschichte is blue. In the second one, we have das Buch beschreibt den Mauerfall. So here, because something is being described and something is doing the describing, we're guessing that in the class on history, the book is the one describing in the nominative case, and what it's describing is the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is the subject which the student is learning about. So das Buch is red and den Mauerfall is blue. Once again, red is nominative and blue is accusative. Third sentence, der Autor findet die Situation sehr komplex. So the one who is finding here, because findet is finds, must be the author. And we know that because the author is the one writing the description. So the thing that's being found to be very complex is the situation. That's why der Autor is a nominative and red. Die Situation is blue and accusative. The fourth sentence, den Mauerfall versteht der Student, aber die Situation versteht er nicht. Here we have to be very careful because den Mauerfall is at the beginning of the sentence, but it is in the accusative case because we see the article is den. And we already know that no one of the genders has den as its article in the nominative case. So, den Mauerfall versteht der Student, we're putting it for emphasis, that's what he does not understand. aber die Situation versteht, that's what he does understand, but aber die Situation versteht er nicht. So he understands that the wall fell, but he does not understand the broader context or situation. Because the things that are or not understood are being emphasized, they've been moved to the front of the sentence, but remain in the accusative case. We can do this because of the flexibility of German word order, which we simply do not have within the English language. Finally, der Student fragt den Lehrer, and der Lehrer erklärt die Situation, die Mauer. In den Mauerfall, we have, in both cases, the nominative or red item coming first, der Student and der Lehrer, and we have the accusative items, den Lehrer and die Situation, die Mauer, und den Mauerfall coming last. Finally, today we'll consider the question of whether some of the interrogative words can also change their form to reflect the accusative case. Now, you have noticed that the word for who, wer, looks a lot like the determiner der, which changes to den. So it seems logical that you could change that from wer to wenn to change it from who to whom. And that's exactly what you can do within the German language. You can also therefore move it to the front and ask, wen kennt die Studentin? Whom does the student know? Well, because we're placing the emphasis on the whom, rather than the student, we can also retain that position in the accusative at the beginning of the answer, which is den Professor kennt die Studentin. Even though the student's the one doing the knowing, we can move the object to the front for emphasis. And we can ask, wen kennt der Professor nicht? Well, die Studentin kennt der Professor nicht. Here, die Studentin might look like the nominative case because it seems to be the same article, but we know based on the way that the question was framed that the professor is the one doing the knowing, and the one who is not known here is the student who is in the accusative case but appearing at the front of the sentence. And we can ask, wer kennt wen? And that is the question, who knows whom, that we will finish this lesson with.